This recipe is for a half batch of brownies for a trio of desserts, because again, if you're doing a trio of desserts, we want to try and keep the cost down, and half of this batch is the smallest that I can make it, I think. So the first thing to do is prepare your tin. Brownie mixtures have loads of sugar in them, and this is the size square tin that I would normally use for making a brownie. It wouldn't come all the way up the tin, I'd line it with greaseproof. Because I'm only doing a half batch, what I've done is I've lined it with foil, and I've used the foil to make the tin smaller. So the way that I've done this was to press the foil into one side of the tin and then pull it up in the middle where I thought roughly the middle was, and then I just slid the foil from one end of the tin to the other and made sure that that was straight. It's a bit sticky to move at the moment because, as you can see, this is well greased, and it's got to be well greased or I'm not going to be able to get the brownies out later on when they're cooked. So I have my tin prepared and I have all my cake mixture ready, and this brownie mix is a creamed cake mixture. So I've got 100 grams of dark chocolate, and I've chosen dark chocolate because I want that intense chocolate flavour in a brownie. Also, the chocolate has a much higher cocoa content, so I'm going to get more of that flavour. I'm just going to pop that in the microwave for 30 seconds. While I tell you what other ingredients I've got. So I have 2 eggs here with half a teaspoon of vanilla already added to them. So I've already put my vanilla in that. And in a bowl I've got 65 grams of plain flour and 65 grams of cocoa. And the mixture of cocoa and chocolate helps give that intense chocolatey flavour that you are looking for in a brownie. In my bowl I've got 100 grams of soft brown sugar and 50 grams of butter. Now, 30 seconds in my microwave doesn't seem to have made much difference to this chocolate, so I'm just going to put it on for 30 seconds more. It's important with chocolate that you don't just go, well, it'll take a minute and I'll just put it in for a minute. It's much better to do it slowly, 30 seconds at a time, than to overheat your chocolate, because if you overheat it, it's gone. And I'm just going to break my eggs and whisk those lightly with the vanilla while I'm waiting for that chocolate to melt. And the reason that I want the chocolate to be melted first is I want to give it a chance to cool. You don't want to be pouring boiling hot chocolate or really hot chocolate into your cake mix later on. So there we go. Another 30 seconds and they are starting to melt in the middle of the bowl. So they are starting to melt, and I'm just going to give them one last 30 second burst. Another 30 seconds and my chocolate is melted. It's not completely melted. You can see there are still whole chocolate buttons in there, but the heat from the rest of the chocolate will allow that to melt, and wherever possible I melt my chocolate in a plastic bowl if you have one, because the plastic bowls don't hold the heat and don't then allow the chocolate to overheat. So you can see those last few drops, they've nearly gone. So if I leave that on the side, that should finish off on its own. So the first ingredients to be mixed together are the 50 grams of butter and the 100 grams of brown sugar. And I'm starting this off on a really low speed because I've got twice the amount of sugar to butter in here. So normally when we're creaming we have an equal amount of sugar and butter, but with twice the amount of sugar to the butter I want to make sure that I get it all mixed up before I turn the speed up to add the extra air. So now it's all mixed. There we go. So I've got my butter and sugar mixed, and as it's the creaming method I'm going to slowly add my egg, and I'm going to do it slowly, starting off slow again so that this mixture hopefully does not curdle. So you need to add your egg a little bit at a time. Each time you add the egg, you need to mix it really well. If I tip my bowl up, I don't know if you can tell on the video or not, but I can see that the mixture here is much paler in colour than the mixture there. So I'm just going to use my spatula. I'm just going to take it out of the melted chocolate for a minute and use my spatula to push that mixture down to the bottom of the bowl so that all the dark brown sugar is going to get mixed into the egg, and I'm going to add a little bit more egg. It's worth taking your time over this step, putting the egg in a little bit at a time, making sure that it gets whisked in properly to avoid curdling this mixture. So I'm just going to keep adding my egg until it's all done. Okay, I've got all the egg in, and I've been round with my spatula a few times as I was doing it, and now I'm going to add the melted chocolate into this mixture before I put the flour in. So I'm just going to tip my melted chocolate in and whisk it up as it goes. Just going to turn my mixer up a little bit. And I want all that chocolate in there, so again, using your spatula, make sure that all of your chocolate goes into this mixture. And the reason you don't want to overheat your chocolate is you don't want it to go onto really cold ingredients and set as soon as it hits this egg and butter mix. So there we go. So I've got the start of my brownie mix there, and now I'm going to swap and get rid of my electric mixer because I don't want the electric mixer for the last bit. Same as with a normal creamed cake. I now need to add the flour, or in this case the flour and the cocoa, and I've got a really nice smooth mix there. When I put flour and cocoa in, normally I like to sieve mine together. It helps to avoid getting streaks of white flour, but also the cocoa sometimes can be a little bit on the lumpy side. So I like to sieve the two of them together over the top. It adds a little bit of flour, a little bit of air to the flour, so we just aerate it a little bit. And as I say, sometimes you can have lumps in the cocoa, and I don't want lumps in my brownie mix. So I have a few lumps of flour and cocoa there. Push those through with your fingers and then fold this in. And it actually looked a bit like just melted chocolate before I'd added the flour to it, but we just need to fold this flour into this mixture. And till you can't see any more dry flour, dry cocoa, and we've got, there we go, a nice soft gooey brownie mixture. There we are. Now, so again, I'm just going to use the spatula, clean round the bowl, make sure that there is no part of this mixture that does not have the flour mixed through it properly. I don't want to see any of the light areas of brownie mix. And once you've got it this far, you can of course add nuts or fruit or chocolate chips if you want to. I'm just going to do brownie as this is one of a trio of desserts. So this needs to go into your greased tin. So I'm just going to get this all into my cake tin. It's quite a thick mixture. Get it in with the spoon to start with, and then again use the spatula. And you can see, I'll show you in a minute, why I've only lined half these tin. We don't want a really thin brownie. Brownie is supposed to be quite luxurious, and we don't want it to be dry and hard. We want it to be nice and moist in the middle. So having just half the tin for the brownie mixture, I'm just going to spread it out a little bit, is plenty. It's got plain flour in it, so although it will rise as it cooks, it's not going to rise up like a normal cake, because that's not the texture we want from the brownie when it is done. There we go. So, up to the edges of that. Okay, so the brownie is there and in the tin, and I'm just going to pop that straight into my hot oven. Okay, the brownie is cooked. It's got a crust on the top, and if you touch it, you can feel that it's still soft underneath. It shouldn't feel like a cake. It's taken for this half batch just 10 minutes for it to cook, and I'm now going to leave it to cool. Okay, the brownie took about 10 minutes in the oven when I made it with plain chocolate. So this is the one that I've made with plain chocolate, and I'm just going to slice the edges off, cut it in half down the middle, and as you can see, it's nice and sticky in the middle. It has the correct texture for a brownie, and I'm just going to take the edges off a little bit and cut some squares. Now, if you were serving this for a dessert on its own or with ice cream, you can leave it in squares and it will be fine. So I can just put a square of brownie on that plate. It's sticking to me, sticking to the knife. So I have a couple of squares of brownie on that plate. The other thing that you can do, I can cut these a little bit smaller, but also for the trio of desserts, this is really gooey. For the trio of desserts, what I could do is I could take one of the squares and cut it into 2 little triangles, so that rather than just having squares of brownie, I can actually place 2 little triangles onto a plate like that. And these can be, I'm going to put that one flat, they can be dusted with icing sugar. You can use a fruit coulis to decorate your plate, but that's the brownie made with plain chocolate. This brownie I made with milk chocolate. This brownie took longer to cook, and I've cooked this one in a loaf tin. I also stirred some white chocolate through this one, as you can see. So this one, I have some white chocolate, and this one again still. I'm just going to take the ends off. I cleaned my knife in between the white, the dark and the milk chocolate brownie. This one you can also cut into squares or triangles to display on your plate or your serving dish. It's entirely up to you. I'm going to do one square, excuse me, and one into little triangles. And one of the things that you can do with your serving dish, if I just move that out of the way, I have a slate here. If you don't have a slate, I quite like the slates because I like the dark colour being a contrast with the food. But having said that, if I put the brownie directly onto this slate, it doesn't really stand out. So one of the things that you can do is use some icing sugar. So I have some icing sugar and what is basically a tea strainer. I've also got a little cake fork, so I'm going to put my cake fork over one end of the tray for the minute. So I'm just going to put that there, get a little bit of icing sugar in my sieve and just sieve the icing sugar over the slate. So I'm going to put a little bit of icing sugar over this end. This icing sugar is quite lumpy. It doesn't have to completely cover. You can, if you like, use paper to make a definite edge for the icing sugar, and then when I lift the fork off, I have a little mark of a fork. And I'm also going to put a little bit of the icing sugar at this end of my slate. So I'm just going to roughly put a little bit of icing sugar both ends of the slate, just to make the brownie stand out a bit more. If I then put a couple of pieces of brownie onto the white icing sugar, it just makes them stand out a little bit more. I have the fork mark at this end of the slate. I have somewhere, here we go, a little jug of cream that I can put in the middle, and just to finish it off I can use a single strawberry for decoration on the plate. So I'm just going to cut the strawberry. I'll turn it round so you can see what I'm doing. Hopefully I'm just cutting slices towards the top of the strawberry, not all the way through. And then if you just press gently on that, your strawberry will fan. So I can then put the strawberry here next to the cream, or I could put it over here. But just adding that little bit of icing sugar to the plate just makes that pop out a little bit more. If you've got a white dish or a white plate, you can do something similar with cocoa powder, just to give you a bit more impact on the presentation.